Manly Hall official, is glad to produce, publish and offer. The dope problem. It is safe to say that there has never been a time in the history of the world when the dope problem was more acute than it is now, when in spite of ever stricter laws and the increasing vigilance of city and state officials, cooperating with the national powers, the menace still flourishes, eating to the very heart of our homes and extending from the humblest of our people to the very highest places in the land. In our days of prosaic and unsophisticated thought, when superstitions are limited to horseshoes, bent pins, ladders, and four-leaf clovers, we have very little time for anything that is not tangible to our physical senses or capable of analysis in the scientific laboratory, but the greatest of philosophers and thinkers, whose books are now in our public schools and whose names are listed with the benefactors of humanity, have realized that behind each visible, tangible effect there is an invisible, intangible cause. In spite of all that may be said to the contrary, we must realize that there is something deeper and more subtle than the physical drug behind the dope problem. Man is learning more and more rapidly that there is an unseen, unknown element which may be called the third party in the transaction of being. For ages we have heard of the spirits of the plagues and how the messengers of death have walked with men, and we know from literal statistics how disease and seismic cataclysms follow war and martial disorders as the result of subtle, intelligent, natural reaction. Somewhere in nature there is a reservoir in which is stored the expressions of energy radiating from the actions of man. There is a little sorting room there such as can be seen in a post office where mail is being distributed. Among the other divisions there is a rendezvous where bad spirits congregate, these bad spirits being composed of human weaknesses and perversions. These gathering together from the many subject to the same shortcomings produce vitalized forms capable of being felt in world affairs. The ancients said that great vices such as dope, wars, crime, etc., built forms which they call demons and elemental beings who, after a time nourished by the perversions of mankind and supplied with power by those addicted to their perversion, become menacing creatures, which brooding over the world gather into their tentacles those who, while not strong enough to withstand this concentrated force, would otherwise never become addicted to crime, dope, or excesses. Each new addict joins the great throng who worship at the altars of death and bow before the shrine of self-destruction, and through the languor of morphine and heroin they feed the great demon spirit of dope with their own lifeblood, while cocaine with IB1 frantic outbursts of uncontrollable passion not only wrecks the addict but the expression of his perverted energy perpetuated in the living substances of nature go forth on an endless round of destruction. If you're enjoying this video and finding value in the content, we kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel. A large portion of our listeners and viewers haven't subscribed yet, and by doing so, you'll help us grow and continue bringing you more high-quality audiobooks. Your support means a lot to us, and it's just one click away. So, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to stay connected and never miss out on our latest releases. Not only must we fight the dope problem from the purely physical basis, with the two-edged sword of education as a precautionary and medical treatment as a reparative measure, but we must also fight this invisible something, the spirit of dope. This can only be done when the great bloodless boycott is laid upon every expression of nature and each individual mentally and physically combining for the good of all labors to stamp out this plague and blight against proper thinking and normal living. man is learning more and more rapidly that thoughts are things. Certain vibratory rays pour from him as the result of thought, action, and desire, and he himself may be responsible for suffering and pain thousands of miles from his own being as the result of the energies which he radiates through nature, which are perpetuated like the little rings in the water when a stone is dropped. Our thoughts and emotions have much to do with the external things of nature, which fact has been proven by our latest scientific investigations. Autosuggestion, as demonstrated by Dr. Koo, is a mental process which undoubtedly has an effect upon the organism of the patient, and in a similar way the combined thoughts of individuals affect the entire human family. The demoralizing effect of dope upon the manhood and womanhood of America results not only from the habit-forming qualities of cocaine, heroin, and morphine, but also depends upon a certain, subtle something, unformed and intangible, which takes hold of the victim when he first makes himself receptive to its influences by building the dope into his physical organism, which action ties him by the law of attraction to the spirit of dope. The power of thought and its effect upon the physical organism has been proven, and as the human race in the last analysis is but a single organism, so the thought power of the race is brought to bear for good or ill by thoughtless individuals upon the ailments and dissensions of the race. All mental, physical, and emotional excesses of individuals help to perpetuate the crimes of their peoples. Weak-kneed and destructive thinking is a curse to humanity. The "L told you so's," the "I knew it all the times," the "well, he deserves it," and those people who are ever feeding nature with destructive thoughts and criticizing eternally their brothers are helping to nourish and feed the spirits of crime and are the mainstay of diet for demons such as dope, while each constructive thought of helpfulness, cheerfulness, and the innate desire of individuals to assist the suffering and to cleanse the stables of the world with clean, constructive thoughts. Busy hands and soft hearts will help to stamp out this demon dope in a way which will never be possible through the powers of law alone. The spirit of the snows. Yes, sir, I've been through more and most of them in this here country, but I don't mind tellin' ye, pardner, I'm down on my luck. If you'll stake me, I'll give it back to you some of these days when I strike mine, honest I will. The figure leaned over the little table, a strange, pathetic expression in his big, gray eyes. He was a sourdough from the creeks, was honest Jim Harley, as straight and honest a man as ever came over the trail. He was a typical Alaskan as the country was in the days of its glory, although he was rough and unkempt with grizzly beard and matted hair. Jim Harley was a gentleman from the boots up. It was whispered around that Jim was a man who had been something in the old country, but that he had got into a scrape at home and had fled unknown in the early days to the new bonanza, not so much for gold, though he had pan of it aplenty, but just to be away where no one could see him and where none would talk to him about things which filled his heart with sadness and despondency. Those were the days when Jim Harley had the biggest poke in the country, and wherever he went he was loaded for bear. They were the days when the sourdoughs shelled out the gold just to pan the sawdust on the barroom floor, for gold flowed like whiskey when Jim Harley was in his prime. Jim had married up in the country, but I guess you know that already. He married Rosie, one of the dance hall girls, and built a little cabin where a small creek ran into the Yukon. If you talk with Jim a little while, he'll tell you the story, and he'll tell you another, too, of how the romance ended, and he'd never known anything about it, he says, if it hadn't been for the Jap he met on the riverboat coming up the Inside Passage. He made friends with the little fellow from the island of the Pacific, and he says that the Jap was a wonder. Haraku he called him, and I guess that was his name, but he sure was a queer character, for he brought with him the legends of his own country, and through the long winter nights he and Jim Harley would sit by the hour while the Oriental told the strange stories and legends of his people. Jim Harley was always fond of that kind of stuff. People used to say he was queer, and after a certain night when the northern lights came down like wondrous arches of coral from the sky, and strange temples of gleaming fire shone forth and wavy lace curtains of light streamed across the heavens, everybody agreed that he was insane. They called him Poor Jim Harley after that, but he went on his way. And if you get him a drink or stake him to a meal, he will tell you about what happened on a certain night in November when the alcohol was down 60 below and even the Malamutes were shut up and no sound broke the night but the cracking of logs and an occasional pung when a nail flew out of the wood. Jim and Haraku were sitting by the fire and Jim's wife were in the other room, for Jim had some cabin in those days. It had 2 rooms in it but I suppose I'd better let Jim tell it himself, so I'll slip him a 5 and you shall hear it from his own lips. Here why are, Jim. Things are tough with me, too, but here's 5. And by the way, I don't think you ever told me that story about you and the Jap. Didn't I? Exclaimed Jim, brightening up. Now, partner, I sure am obliged to you, 'cause as soon as summer comes, I'm going up in the country again back where them mountains are. But you know I never go up while the snow is on. No, sir, it's 20 years since I've been outdoors while it was snowing. I don't suppose you know why, but that's the story. And if you'll shove up a little closer, I'll tell you what happened to me in the snowstorm of when Haraku, the wife, and I was staking it in Nugget Creek. Well, sir, it was evening and I plumb forget what the wife was doing, poor kid, when Haraku and I were sitting close to the stove, close as we could get, for why no, that was the coldest snap of the year and the snow was heaping up over the roof of our little shack. That cold. But that ain't the story. I must tell you about Haraku. He was a strange fellow, that little Japanese. Yes, sir, as white a soul as I ever met, and no fool neither. You know I ain't never been a religious man or anything like that. Fact, I couldn't tell you the names of the saints from sardine labels today. Course I knew 'em then, but it seems as I've forgotten everything, partner, everything but that night. But I can tell you I never felt in all my life so much like religion as when that little Japanese was around. He used to tell stories about Buddha and the ways of the holy men in Japan and the East, and you know I got so I lived better and felt better every time Haraku was around me. Well, we was sitting there and he was telling me one of the most beautiful legend stories I ever heard in my life. Just then an awful heavy wind started to sigh and cry, and above it all a strange tapping sound came at the door of the cabin. I'll swear the little Japanese turned white and I was powerful frightened myself, 'cause we both knew that there was 6 feet of snow in front of that door. Gently the tapping sounded again. "Yukiana," whispered the Japanese, "grapin me by the arm. I've heard it before and I know what it means." "What is it?" I asked in amazement. "It is the Lady of the Snows," he whispered. "She come through the silence of the storm and death comes with her. Silently she taps, you can barely hear the gentle rapping, but she will come in before the morning and kiss one of us to everlasting sleep. I turned to my companion to see if he was in earnest, but one look at his staring eyes and drawn face told me that he meant every word he said. "Have you never heard of the Lady of the Snows?" he whispered as the gentle tap-in continued, "who steals softly with fluttering garments and closes the eyes of those who die in the storm? She is Yukiana, the Lady of White, and when she taps one must go forth to join the spirits of the snow." For some minutes we sat in silence, and slowly the head of the little Japanese sunk on his chest, and I felt a strange drowsiness creeping over me, too, which I couldn't understand. I tried to sit up, but couldn't, and little by little my head too sunk on my breast, and I seemed to slumber. But though I could not move, my eyes was open and I could see what was happening around me. The tapping continued gently on the door, and slowly I saw the wooden beam that closed it move from the old wooden socket, and gently, oh, how gently, the door opened and in there poured an avalanche of snow, swirling, twisting, and tinning, fanned by the wings of the storm. Then slowly out of the snow there formed a strange creature, a woman of shireen white robed and glistening, gleaming snowflakes. Her skin was as white as her garments, as was the glorious pearly curls of her hair. Yes, she was indeed a creature of snow, yet alive. She didn't have any feet, for her body trailed off in a swirl of snowflakes as she seemed to float and flutter in the cabin doorway. Without a sound she entered, and I felt a strange chill come over me as she leaned over Haraku and myself, a strange chill like that of the cold snow that marked her coming, and I remembered the time when I had been lost in the snowy waste with my dogs dead and the food gone, for the same chill as of eternal night crept over me now as then. Slowly the floating form passed on and stood before the door that led to the other room. A great fear gnawed at my soul, and in terror I tried to move. Was this white specter going to claim the one I loved? I could not move and was forced to watch in agony. The door slowly opened and the figure of blinding snowflakes passed into the second room. Only a few minutes went by and then the portal opened again, but there was two shireen figures instead of one. I gave a scream of mortal agony, for my wife was the second figure of shireen snowflakes that passed slowly out into the great unseen world of swirling death and gleaming ice. Then the door closed once more and the room seemed just as it had been before. It was just about that time that something snapped in me and all went black. When I came to, I found Haraku trying to bring me back to consciousness. The first words I asked him was of my wife, and he sadly shook his head. "Yukiana has taken her away," he whispered softly, "and true enough, the girl I loved was dead, stolen away by that cursed spirit of the snow." An open shutter, a frozen form, a room filled with swirling snowflakes was all that remained to tell of the tragedy of my life. "Well, sir," I told Haraku how the second figure had gone with the first, and he sadly shook his head. "Yes," he answered, "she is gone forever. She has become another spirit of the snow. For all who die in the frozen northlands become spirits of the snow and live forever in the soft and crystal whiteness of the snowflakes." "Well, sir, that's my story." "Yes, sir, and it's true. I ain't never been the same since that night, sir, for my Rosie took my heart with her out there into the snow, out there into the wintry night, where she now lives forever as one of the spirits of the snow. So, I never go out in the snowstorm now, sir, 'cause I don't want to see her out there, living, dancing, swaying in her robes of shireen colors, and like Yukiana kissing the wanderers to sleep as they join her in a rendezvous with death. She's there, partner, she's there, and somehow, I know that someday I'll be with her out there in that eternal whiteness. I know I think I'm crazy, partner, they all do. But I ain't, it's God's gospel truth. But thanks for the poke, partner, I'm going out soon as the snow clears to stake a rich one in the mountains, because I know it's there and I want all kinds of money, sir, yes, just to pay up all my friends as has been kind to me. And when I find that big stake it's gonna be worth millions, and I'm gonna stake you to a quarter interest, partner, for the 5 you loan me tonight. Goodbye, partner, I must be going. It's quit snowing and I'll have time to get to the company store 'fore it starts again. God bless you, partner, and whatever you do when you go out in the snow, remember Yukiana, who will come as sure as fate, and you'll hear her knocking at your cabin door. Jim Harley staggered to his feet and, pulling his rough hat down over his matted hair, lurched out of the little room where I had been sitting with him into the cold Alaska night. And that is the last time that Jim Harley was ever seen alive when he left my cabin door. He had only been gone a few minutes when the blizzard broke again, blinding sheets of snow and swirling hail which lasted for many hours. When it stopped and the temperature rose, some fellows went out in there. They found Jim Harley lying dead in the snow less than a block from my cabin. He had a piece of paper in his hand and a broken pencil stub, and he had tried to write something, but no one ever knew what it was. His face had a happy look and he seemed glad, so I kinda reckon the Lady of the Snow must have found Jim, too, and as her white form bent over him and her cold lips rested upon his forehead, I kinda guess he must have looked up and seen the face of his Rosie who died in the cabin so many years before. I'm just saying that 'cause he looked so happy. Well, about the Japanese Haraku, I don't know anything about him. I guess he went back to Japan. Maybe he's dead, too. Every time it snows around here, I can't help but think that maybe the spirits of Jim Harley and his Rosie are somewhere among the snowflakes. There ain't no tellin', partner, maybe one of these days I'll wander out in the snow, get in a drift on the Great White Pass, or lined up on the White Horse, or maybe just naturally get mine in the freeze up. If I do and you don't know what's happened to me, I don't know where I'll be. Maybe it'll be in hell, 'cause I ain't done nothing good in my life that is particularly good. Or maybe I'll be out there somewhere among the snowflakes, 'cause Haraku says that all who die in the snow live on forever in the snowflakes. I gazed into the great abyss of the mystic mirror, fascinated by the terrific scene that unrolled itself before my eyes. Little can man understand the great cataclysm that burst over the Atlantean world, sweeping a mighty continent from end to end with flames and ashes, and burying it forever beneath the ceaseless waves of a mighty ocean. I had never realized it myself until I gazed into that great frame of living glass in whose crystal depths the world's works were unfolded. The master beside me still had his hand upon my shoulder, and I felt a strange thrill pass through me as though a power unseen was radiating from the tips of his fingers. My flesh grew warm beneath his touch, and before I realized it, I was cringing, for it seemed that the hand upon me was a blazing coal that singed and seared the flesh. I seemed to live again in the days that were past, and before my mind's eye unrolled the picture of my Atlantean life, and from that moment the doctrine of rebirth was a fact to me. I knew that that land torn and broken by nature's wrath and the avenging hand of a mistreated god had been my land, and my heart ached as I saw its wondrous glory vanish in the darkness. Oh, that such glories as these should vanish from the light of men, I whispered to my guide. "It is the way of men," answered the Oriental. "All through the ages man has fought for the great illusion. He has made a truth of that which could never be and has glorified the unreality. Remember the world we live in, the things we touch, the ones we love. They are the great illusion which never has been and never can be the answer to the problem of our souls. There is but one reality, the spirit of truth. All else is Maya, the great illusion. Behold the city of illusion. For here man built his towers, his temples, and his minarets. Here he measured and trued and labored among the things of earth, and in a moment, they are gone. Just one brief second, and the labors of 1,000,000 years, the thoughts of sages, the problems of philosophers, all these are gone. The labor of 1,000,000 hands, the prayers of 1,000,000 hearts, all vanish in a single night. And how much like this mighty city of the shining gates is the life of man and the world of his desires. For though he labors to build, though he dies that the works of his hands may live, the storm passes over and they are no more. The illusions return again to the dark treasure chest of the unknown. The works are gone forever. What remains? The old Hindu gazed long and meditatively into the depths of that mystic haze through whose somber shadows the last ruins of an empire dimly shone. What remains? He turned to me, his eyes lit up with a fire that spoke of powers unknowable. I remain. Forever my works go back to the formless clay from whence they came. The dust that I have molded with my fingers is scattered to the cloudless wastes of eternity, but I remain. Cities that are built fall, armies of men scatter the stones of their fortresses, and the plowman with his oxen oft-times plows fields where once mighty temples raised their domes. They are the great illusions, for there is no falseness as false as the reward of works. The works are the great eternal truth, their fruits the endless illusion. Labor not for rewards, neither build among the impermanent things, for they shall go, and the place shall know them no more. Yet through the endless ages of oblivion there shines one light divine, I am. My works are not, my thoughts are not, my bodies are not, I am. That which is not I remaineth but a little while and is gone, for from the open mouth of Brahma pour out sparks unnumbered, and one by one they shine out in the everlasting vistas of eternity. Brahma remains, unnamed and unknowable. Before mountains and valleys were brought forth, before gods and worlds were ordained, before the stars were fixed upon their course, I am. My works have vanished in an endless night, and yet I have all that I have ever done. I am wealthy with riches that far exceed the heritage of kings, for the fruits of all my labors mean naught beside the power that has come to me through the works that I have done. Man labors for two in his life, the forms that surround him and the life which ensouls him. But the work that he does he but performs to learn the way it should be done, and those who are slaves to the things they do are worshippers at the shrine of illusion. When man serves the whims of man, he but builds lofty temples from the substances of not being which someday must fall around him a broken ruin like the city whose fallen towers and crushed ideals loom in the shadows of this mystic frame. Serve not the impermanent, nor store up your treasures on earth, for the ever-changing globe soon swallows up forever the creations of man, and the place where they were is broken and barren, and the life that loved them is stricken with remorse. Serve rather the light, the permanent, the true. Not the passing day should we consider, but the eternal now, unlimited by time, unmeasured by comparison, that should we serve. In the ages past, in the dark vistas of the unknown, you laid the foundation of a great work which you vowed that you would achieve, and having finished it, allow it to slip through your fingers to be forgotten. For the joy of man is to forget, while the joy of God is to remember. Blessed are those who are united by pains or pleasures, unfastened by remorse, unchained by the shadow shapes of Maya. Out of the world you have been called to learn the way that leads to heights eternal, a chosen son of God ordained in the temple of the rising sun to serve without reward, to labor with the great unknown and never to see the works of your hand. Look! The mirror is clearing, the red blood of a people bathed in iniquity is giving place to the pale calm of cosmic night. The clouds of doubt and misgivings which surrounded this ancient people are gone. But it is not to see these things that you have been called out of the ranks of men to labor with the divine. It is because a great work must be done, a work without limitation, a work which you vowed you would accomplish before the stars took their present course. A great battle is to be fought, a bloodless war, a war of love, a war of compassion, a struggle concealing itself beneath the garb of peace. The world in which we live is facing a great crisis, far greater than the eyes of man can see or his heart can comprehend. In the silence of this cave I hear voices, the chanting of the Shittas and the low muttering of the Zen. A great day is dawning, for the world stands as it stood in the days of the lost continent. The red walls of hate and lust are blotting out the light of heaven's sun. The hosts of evil have armed themselves for a conflict to the death. The battle which you have been called to fight is a battle of intellects, a battle of souls. The hosts of light are gathering at the sound of a call that is ringing through the seven worlds. Little does humanity dream of the silent powers which are molding the destiny of its world. Little do the souls of living things understand how the sons of light, the flame-born spirits of the eternal God, are gathering in endless train in the spheres. Little deal man sees the waving curtain of power which sway like streamers through the cosmic night, nor does he know or understand those secret powers of death, hate, crime, murder and perversion which stalk like demons amid the depths of ignorance. The powers of Baphomet, Prince of Darkness, have gathered from the spheres of gloom, and that great negation, the spirit of death, is loosened upon mankind. The same dark clouds gather that gathered over the temples of Atlantis. The same powers hover here today that once changed the destiny of worlds. And you have been called to fight with the powers of light, that the black-robed specters of evil may not master the lives of men. The brothers of the shining robe are being called, and though they know it not, the vows they took in the ages past they are now about to fulfill. The world is crying for light, yearning for truth, praying for help through the darkness of ignorance. And here in the temple of the caves the silent conclave meets to carry on the sun globe in its thunderous path. The powers of darkness shall not win, for the gods are fighting for souls and spirits and the life of man. You are one who has been called. You may not know who the others are. Your duty is to go out into the world of men and acclaim yourself as you are one of the helpers seeking with spirit and with truth to fight the battle of human growth. This you shall do in accordance with the plans laid out for your being, and this night in the silence of this cave you shall be ordained anew a brother of the shining robe. Then shall you put on your garments of glory, you who did not know that you possessed them, and go out into the world of men to carry the message of the great light. Thus, it is written in the infinite hand, thus shall you obey. Slowly the old priest moved away from the mirror, and as I followed his stately figure in its robe of gleaming gray, which now seemed iridescent like mother of pearl, shining with the colors of 1,000 rainbows, I heard a strange voice within me speak as though from the depths of my soul. Its words were, "Go thou, also." I turned towards the aged Mahatma, whose eyes rested upon mine with a wondrous compassion. As I neared him, I grew dizzy and was forced to stop. The walls of the temple seemed to fade and swim around me in a hopeless mass of lights. The carved elephants gleamed and glowed and finally vanished in a mystic haze until only the figure of the priest remained seemingly suspended in the midst of an endless oblivion. As I watched him, his body seemed to unfold in great streamers of light that poured forth in swelling radiances. Blue and yellow and the most glorious shades of violet and rose, the gold of the sun and the silver of the summer moon, seemed to shine out from his soul, a great, gleaming heart of living fire that blazed within the center of his being. For miles it seemed these strange streamers poured into a vast eternity until his body became but a tiny speck surrounded by a wondrous halo of 1,000,000-colored flame. I was blinded and raised my hand to cover my eyes. And although they were closed, I could still see the shining figure. My body seemed thrilled with the rays of light which poured into it from the mystic form. As I watched, in spite of myself, a great globe of golden light detached itself from the center of the glowing form and passed out like a tiny sun of flame towards me through the radiance of the mystic aura. I knelt upon some unknown foundation that I could not see, and as I did so the globe of light struck my breast and was swallowed up in the darkness of my own being. But it was not hidden. From my hands and feet, my eyes, and even the pores of my skin, it poured out, and I too was surrounded by a shining light which dazzled me with its brilliancy. A voice from the great halo which gleamed around the mystic, shadowy form of the Mahatma spoke, "In the name of the living God, Brahma the divine, go to thy works, my son, for from the beginning of time thy labors have been ordained. Go carry them out into the world of men, for thou art one of that mystic band, the brothers of the shining robe." It all faded as though it had not been, and I found myself kneeling on a broken pinnacle of rock on the side of those lofty mountains which reach up to touch the sky. Before me rose that mighty mountain in whose heart was the temple of the caves. But now it seemed my way was in another direction, for the narrow path that led back to the home of men stretched out like a tiny silver thread against the darkness of the night. To be continued. Balder the Beautiful. Our little story is laid among those romantic cliffs and fjords which make Norway and Sweden God's masterpieces in natural grandeur. It seems that each stone and hill have a mystic legend all its own, and the whole land tells of strange heroes, wondrous gods and goddesses, who while now forgotten by many still claim the hearts of those who attune themselves to the mystic grandeur of the Northlands. Mountains, valleys, picturesque waterfalls, and quaint villages, this beautiful country, while sturdy folk with simple ideals and hearts of gold dwell among the rocks and cliffs and valleys of this strange land. This is the country of the Norsemen and the Vikings of old, sturdy warriors of the seven seas who in their winged dragons sailed even to the coasts of Vineland when Eric the Red was their leader. This is a land of torn and warring things, but now the sturdy hearts are at rest and busy with the toils of the day. They have forgotten the glory of the past. The Scandinavian peninsula is a world unto itself, a land of romance and mystic glory. Still the bards seemed to wander from hamlet to hamlet, telling the story of gods who fought with men, of Odin the All-Father, of Thor and his mighty hammer, and of Balder the Beautiful. Still in the shade of evening one may live again in those mystery schools where the Drotters taught their disciples of the wonders of the soul, of the great temple of Ups, of the world tree Yggdrasil, and of Asgard the temple of the gods, and Valhalla the home of the slain. Still in the silence of the night, if you have the poetic ear of the seer, you may hear the cry of the Valkyrie, and shadowy shapes will seem to pass through the shades of night as when the gods of old rode out on the great hunt. Indeed, this is the land of mystic beings, and oh that the soul of man might learn to live again in the mysteries of the past. But they are forgotten forever, it seems, for the younger generation that dwells in this wondrous country of romance and legends knows little of its divine allegories, its sublime myths and legends, which conceal under rune and symbol the will of the gods. In a little village surrounded by this mystic grandeur of a faith forgotten, there lived two youths who had for many years been brothers in spirit, until the rivalry of love had broken their bond of friendship and turned them into bitter enemies. These two were as different as the snow of winter and the heat of summer in the strange land that was their home. Olaf was a true son of ancient Norway. Still in his soul was the heart of the Viking, the tempestuous spirit of barbaric freedom. He had never embraced the Christian faith of his country, but still a youth he lived in the ages of the dead, and the ancient spirit of the Northland ran through his veins in streams of living fire. Wild, tempestuous, yet wonderfully loving and sweet, in his childlike simplicity he seemed a figure from ages past, when the sailing dragons weathered the storms of many seas and the crown of rulership was placed upon the head of an infant king in some mystic cave. Karl, on the other hand, lived in a world of modern things. He had been educated in Stockholm, and his life was much the same as in this country. In line with his family, he was a Christian and honestly believed the concepts of the Master's faith. All he knew of the ancient faiths were the legends he had read in school. Peaceful and quiet, he lived on a little farm raising cattle and tilling the fertile ground. So, while Olaf wandered among the mountain crags and precipices, Karl tended the flocks that he had gathered and lived the uneventful life of a farmer. It was these two who had sought to win favor in the eyes of Hilda, and she had chosen the better educated, prosperous Karl rather than the uncertain, wandering spirit of Olaf. It was then that rivalry took the place of friendship, and as the hours drew close when Karl and Hilda were to be married in the little church in the valley, Olaf, brooding and grieving, wandered among the hills and cliffs, crying out to his gods and nursing within his soul the spirit of vengeance. It was so unlike Olaf, too, for his spirit was as carefree as that of a child. But in some way this disappointment of the heart had turned him against the world. From rock to rock, he jumped until at last he stood at the very peak of a lofty precipice below which in the valley the little village snuggled in the encircling arms of the hills. As Olaf looked over toward the town, he seemed to see the little church with its spire, and with bitterness and hate he felt that this strange god of the Christians had something to do with this separation from the one he loved. The youth sat down on a broken boulder, his head between his hands, devising some way to win back Hilda or discredit his rival. There through the hours of afternoon Olaf sat like a figure of stone, and there within his soul was born the spirit of hate which glowed like a dark red coal, clouding his whole being with its angry gleam, his bright, boyish face shaded by its clouds that stole from him the beauty and sweetness which marked this son of the frozen north. Slowly the shades of evening drew around him and the little village vanished in the shadows of the hills. Tiny sparks of light shone forth as lamps were lit, and their warm glow seemed to deepen the chill in the heart of Olaf. The fiery hate of the Norseman was in his soul, but his hands clenched only the empty air when he would that he could close them over the sword of a Viking. Suddenly a peal of silvery laughter sounded up from the winding road below that twisted in and out among the rocks. Olaf shrank back with a cry. He recognized the voice and also another which now spoke up, and he knew that along the winding path below him Hilda and Karl were walking. The voices drew closer and closer until at last Olaf, looking over the edge of the rocks, saw some 10 feet below him the two who so strangely claimed dominion over the two sides of his nature, Hilda whom he loved and Karl of whom he was insanely jealous. On a little cleft of broken stones below him the two stopped and, seating themselves, whispered of the plans which they had made for the future, little realizing the presence of the agonized listener above. Olaf crept to the edge of the broken rocks and gazed over, then slowly there dawned upon his mind a plan. He was surrounded by broken boulders. What if one of them should fall and strike his rival? The fierce light of hate flashed again in his eyes. No one could ever know. His hand closed over a stone and his fingers clenched its surface until the very bones ached as there surged through his being a passion indescribable. Slowly he raised the rock with which he intended to shatter forever the romance below. As he picked it up to cast down on the head of the unsuspecting youth, something seemed to say within his own soul, "Is that what your gods would decree?" He hesitated. His god? Olaf closed his eyes and thought of his father and the mystic lessons that his parents had given him in the forgotten religion of his people. What do the gods care for the works of men? He laughed to himself. Mayhap I shall suffer, but no agony could be like unto that I suffer now. And again, he lifted the stone and poised it over the head of his victim. A merry laugh sounded from below which tore Olaf to the very soul, and with a hand steady with some power unamenable he aimed the stone at the dim form of his rival. As the gods decree, he whispered and cast it with all his strength. As he did so a great arm appeared out of the night, a phantom form of shining light which carried a mighty shield from the surface of which gleamed forth a golden sun. The stone struck the buckler and vanished in a cloud of dust, never reaching the two seated upon the rocks below. Olaf, with a cry of terror, leaped backwards and fell half senseless to the ground. As he did so there appeared before him a shining figure such as the eyes of man have seldom looked upon. A glorious youth stood before him, robed from head to foot in pale turquoise blue, trimmed with white fur and golden ornaments. His cape was thrown back and his breastplate was a lion's head of solid gold. On his arm he carried the mighty shield which Olaf had seen but a moment before, while in the other hand this phantom stranger carried a branch of mistletoe. It was not his garb, however, which fascinated Olaf, it was the face of the mystic form. The figure that stood before him was a glorious blonde-haired, blue-eyed youth whose flowing beard of golden yellow melted with the curls upon his forehead and the ringlets on his shoulders. His whole being spoke of light and warmth and peace. "Who are you, sir?" cried Olaf as he gazed upward into the sad eyes of the stranger. "Who are you that comes thus in my moment of agony?" "I answered the stranger in his wondrous, musical voice, "Know you not who I am? You who have lived so long and believed so truly the ancient faith which is now forgotten, know you not the son of Odin, the All-Father?" "Yes, yes," cried Olaf, "I know thee now, for many times hast my father spoken of thee. Do with me as thou wilt, master, I am thy slave, for art thou not Balder, Balder the beautiful?" The figure nodded its head and spoke once more. "I am he. Do you not love me, Olaf, I who am indeed the spirit of love and truth?" "Yes, yes," cried the terror-stricken youth at the feet of the god. "Then," answered the stranger, "if you love me, do not slay me. Do you see this mistletoe branch? This was the rock you threw at Karl." "I do not understand the words you speak, master," answered the trembling youth. "Then listen, in the name of the ancient faith, and I will tell you. I, Balder, am the spirit of love and truth, gladness and sunshine, and those who love and are loved are under my protection and shall rest in safety beneath the shelter of my shield. For I have been given by my Father the work of guarding the joys of mankind. When I was a blind, all nature swore to love me, all but this branch of mistletoe. Nothing can harm me but this, a parasite. Know you that this mistletoe which alone can kill the god of light is jealousy, the murderer of truth." As he spoke, Olaf gave a gasp, for there appeared in front of Balder another figure, a giant of living flames who carried in his hands a bow of angry red. "This," said Balder, "is Loki, the keeper of the fires." The figure of fiery light wrenched the slip of mistletoe from the hand of the god and quickly formed of it an arrow which he drew to the head of the flaming bow that he carried and fired it straight at the breast of the light god, and then, with a cry of exultation, Loki vanished in the night. Balder the Beautiful swayed for a second, his eyes lit up with an agony divine. Then the god fell at the feet of Olaf, who sprang to the side of the figure which lay dying upon the ground. It was then that the dying god whispered in his ear in a voice faint and broken the mystic lesson of his life. "Oh, Olaf, from your angry thoughts was born Loki, god of the flames, from that rock you cast the mistletoe. And here at your feet I die, murdered by your shaft, never to rise again until all things of earth are redeemed." Olaf fell broken-hearted at the sight of the god, who continued in his soft, sweet tone as the blood poured from the wound in his breast. "Oh, son of earth, listen to your teacher, the Spirit of God, and know that I am hidden in your soul and in the soul of all that lives. I am the spirit of love and harmony and peace. I rule supreme in the temple of the gods as the beloved of my father until Loki, the spirit of hate, passion, and jealousy is born in the soul of man. Then with the mistletoe arrow of perversion I am slain by my own children. So have you slain this night the god of love, who has never done anything but love you and guide you and serve you. For from your own hate is born the demon who slays the god of harmony. Let me not die in vain, who has died so often, the all-seeing eye for the world." Suddenly, as Olaf watched, the figure changed and was robed in a simple white garment, and on his head was a wreath of thorns. "Yes," continued the god, as Olaf gasped in amazement, "I am the same. I am the spirit who is slain eternally for the sins of the world. I am Balder the Beautiful, in whose heart is the arrow of Loki. I am the Christ in whose side is buried the spear of the centurion. And, oh, If the children of men would only know that they slay me every day when I do not but pray for them." Olaf said no more, for his heart was too full for words. With a cry he fell upon the body of the god. A hand rested upon his head, and a voice weak and dying spoke, "Forgive him, Father, for he knows not what he does." The god fell back and lay face upward, bathed in the light of the silver moon shining over the top of the hills. How long Olaf lay there he did not know, but it seemed like all eternity. When he came to himself again, he was lying on the plateau of rock stretched out across a broken heap of stones. Rising to his feet, he gazed in all directions, seeking for the dying god, but there was no one to be seen. The sun was already peeping over the cleft in the mountains. Day was dawning. Olaf gazed down where the lovers had been sitting, but of course there was no one there. A strange, new life had come, however, to this spirit of the Vikings. A new world had opened to Olaf, and as he climbed slowly down the hills and returned to the little village, a great glory shone from his being until he almost looked as radiant and wonderful as the god himself. 3 days later in the little church, Karl and Hilda were married, and Olaf, the restless spirit of the Northlands, was there. Yes, Olaf was the best man. And it seemed that through him a hand invisible united those two souls, and many of the old folks whispered that Olaf looked more like a god that day than a mortal man. Others said that in his eyes shone the fire of the immortals, and one saintly soul whispered to another beside her that it almost seemed that Balder the Beautiful, the spirit of love and truth, was at the wedding. Copyright 2025 by Manly Hall Official. Thank you for listening. Please consider to subscribe, like, and share to help the channel growth. New videos on a daily basis.